Sadguru MeherBaba, who has been completely silent for 7 years. I will ask him a few questions, and he will reply by means of his alphabet board. What is your mission? To make others realize the truth in every phase of life, and to make brotherhood a practical fact. Why have you come especially to America? Because there is greater energy in America than elsewhere. But most of this energy is misdirected. I will divert it into creative and spiritual channels. What will happen when you break your silence? Those to whom I speak will be instantaneously convinced of the truth.
Welcome to the MeherBaba program. I'm Fred Stankus. Along with me is Caroline McDonold, who will basically present a program about the silence of MeherBaba. MeherBaba was silent from the age of 30. In 1925, he began his silence and continued until he dropped his physical body in 1969. And a lot of people throughout the years of doing this public access television program, MeherBaba, sometimes don't even feel that Baba is silent through the way he communicates. But Baba was silent for all that time, and it's an amazing, amazing quality of a perfect master, or for this case, the God-man. And we'd like to just share with you our feelings of his silence and some accounts of people who were with him and their feeling about his silence. And this program perhaps will shed some light on that matter. MeherBaba became silent on July 10th, 1925. He was 3.5 years after realizing himself as being God realized. When he was 31 years old, he began his silence. He then used a pencil and a slate or paper for communications initially, as you saw in that footage at the beginning. In another 18 months, on January 2nd, 1927, he even ceased to write. So he communicated through the alphabet board and also the use of Roman lettering. The board was already made method for communications, making conversation with him very easy. He pointed to the letters and used a variety of signs and gestures. Normally, the board would be read by one of the close disciples of Mandalay when he received visitors or addressed groups or people at meetings. This continued for more than 29 years until on the 7th October 1954, he discarded the board completely. Thereafter, he communicated by means of gestures with which those around him became familiar with. The interpretation of these gestures by some of the Mandalay, in particular, Erich Jesawala, is remarkably well done. We'll have some film footage of Erich speaking a little bit later on in the program. And Erich has been with him continually and became so near to him in spirit that he read Baba just like a book. And when statements of great importance have to be made, the alphabet is spoken, and Baba indicates the letters to make up the words he wants through sign and gestures. There can be little doubt that the silence and cessation of writing were connected. Why he ceased to speak and write, Baba has explained only vaguely. Though much natural curiosity is aroused, the first question asked when people come to know about him or to see him is why he does it, why is he silent? That both silence and non-writing are of great significance is certain. Not surprisingly, Baba does not explain. Silence is the answer to silence. And Baba occasionally enjoys silence upon his followers, usually for no more than a day at a time. And that brings up the idea of July 10th of each year. Baba lovers throughout the world, some of them take a vow of silence on that given day for 24 hours, from midnight on July the 9th till midnight July the 11th, for a total of 24 hours. And though normally silence is a form of discipline, and for the sake of self-recollection, people maintain silence. And when long silences are ordered, they are for other unexplained reasons. And in the East, the avoidance of words and explanations is a recognized technique in spiritual training. The guru or teacher often gives no answer to his pupils' questions. And Caroline, do you have something to add to this?
Well, I was just looking through this information here, and I see that it says that some of the most recognized and much worshipped manifestation of God is the avatar Zoroaster, Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, and Muhammad have not left a word written in their hands. Thus, it can be safely assumed that it was through their silent, spiritually stimulating work in the higher spheres of existence that they have stamped their advent on this earth, and their messages conveyed into the mind-heart of mankind, guiding it on to its inward journey even to this day. I thought that was interesting.
Yes.
And it says here that Meher Baba began his silence saying it was for a period of 1 year. But when his silence continued indefinitely, much natural curiosity was aroused in the minds of those who followed him, those who met him and those who came to know him. Baba gave a number of declarations on his silence, some of them clothed in a form of allegory and others asserting most unambiguously that his silence was not only the language of his divinity, but serves as an unmistakable sign of the highest form of avataric manifestation on this earth in known history. And he said that he who would deeply ponder over the truth which he declared shall eventually be initiated into the life eternal.
You know, just before Baba gave up the use of the alpha board in the autumn of 1954, it seems to have spoken more about his silence than any other time. And in April 1952, he said, God has everlastingly been working in silence, unobserved, unheard, except by those who experience his infinite silence. If my silence cannot speak, of what avail would be speeches made by the tongue? The very moment when he thinks my speaking should be heard universally, God will make me break my silence. And later on he said, to ask whether my followers will be informed of the time and place of the breaking of my silence would be ridiculous, and in itself would show that the significance of breaking my silence has not been truly understood. I think there's some accounts of previous types of saints and holy people who were silent or maintained some vigils of silence. Wasn't it St. Thomas Aquinas?
Yeah, actually, here's an interesting, it says here, one of the strangest stories of silence is that of St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor of the Catholic Church. As a young man, he was known in Paris as the Dumb Ox. Throughout his life, St. Thomas traveled a great deal, mostly on foot, never staying long anywhere, though often returning to the same place. He labored on his great work, Summa Theologica, for 7 years without completing it, for he stopped, was silent, and wrote no more. This caused great concern, and he was repeatedly urged to continue or to explain why he did not. At last, shortly before he died, he said, "All I have written seems to me to be nothing but straw compared to what I have seen and what has been revealed to me." He died in 1274 at the age of 50. Perhaps with St. Thomas, it was at the moment when understanding flooded his mind that he became silent. He then looked within himself, as with the same glance he looked above. Dionysius, one of St. Thomas' favorite authorities, wrote of the divine silence. I do not think the silence of St. Thomas, any more than the silence of Baba, is to be thought of as contemplative silence, such as, for instance, was practiced so extensively in the mysticism of the Byzantine Church, and is practiced also in Zen and other Eastern systems. Certainly, Baba's silence is not a method of inner mental prayer for the sake of spiritual development. It is both work part of his work and a condition under which that work is done.
And Baba said in 1954, if you were to ask me why I do not speak, I would say I am not silent, and that I speak more eloquently through gestures and the alphabet board. If you were to ask me why I do not talk, I would say mostly for three reasons. Firstly, I feel that through you all I am talking eternally. Secondly, to relieve the boredom of talking incessantly through your forms, I keep silence in my personal physical form. And thirdly, because all talk in itself is idle talk. Lectures, messages, statements, discourses of any kind, spiritual or otherwise, imparted through utterances or writings, are just idle talk when not acted upon or lived up to. If you were to ask me when I break my silence, when will I break my silence? I would say when I feel like uttering the only real word that was spoken in the beginningless beginning, as that word alone is worth uttering. The time for the breaking of my outward silence to utter that word is very near.
Just before Baba gave up the use of the alphabet board in the autumn of 1954, he seems to have spoken more about his silence than at any other time. In April 1952, he said, God has been everlastingly working in silence, unobserved, unheard, except by those who experience his infinite silence. If my silence cannot speak, of what avail would be speeches made by the tongue? The very moment when he thinks my speaking should be heard universally, God will make me break my silence. 2 years later, during his tour in Andhra, he spoke of it on many occasions. He also said, to ask whether my followers will... Oh, that's what you just read. Yes. And now, in the same year, 1954...
Right here, this...
Right. He said, those who have been in his presence know that Baba communicates through his silence. What proceeds from him is beyond words, does not need words, could not be contained in them. The inaudible sound is from heart to heart, silence that penetrates mind and heart. He sometimes reminds those who read or listen to what he says that he uses another language from theirs, which should be remembered when his words are considered. That is, his standpoint is different from those who listen. He is on the level of the listener, but his standpoint is absolute, i.e. timeless and essential, while that of the listener is relative in the terms of earthly life and history. Silence is not only a matter of non-speaking, but silence of the desires, passions, urgings, and conflicts of body and mind. In those who practice it, silence brings about calmness and harmony of the body, making it a ready instrument. It is complete self-possession. Baba's silence places him among the intangible, the unrecorded, and not documented, a positive sign that he does not wholly belong to the rational world of facts and events, but to the inner world of insight and intuition.
We are now going to watch some video that was taken in India, a film of, there will be Padre, one of Baba's close disciples, discussing Baba's going into this special place that was called the Japji Hut on July 9th, 1925, and coming out July 10th silent. And also there will be a talk of a special relationship in being soft and whispering, and then eventually being silent by Erich, one of Baba's close disciples, who was referred earlier as the number one, you could say, right-hand man to Baba in interpreting his gestures. And then, of course, there will be some footage of Baba taken in 1932 in England with C.B. Purdom, who will be interviewing him, and some other related footage. So let's go now and view this film footage.
Also one of the old followers of Baba. I joined Baba in 1921, and when we came down to Meherabad in 1923, Baba got this hut, which is called the Jopri, for himself. In this hut he used to retire for the night, and also during staggered periods of 1 week, 15 days, 10 days, or whatever that be, he used to observe silence and seclusion. During that time, he used to write down on a piece of paper the instructions to the orderly outside here. Anybody could be the orderly. Later on, he just started saying that he was going to keep silence for a longer duration, but he didn't give the date. One day, he says, I'm going to keep silent for a longer duration, and it will be 10th of July. So on the night of the 9th, he goes inside this hut talking, and comes out on the morning of the 10th silent. For a number of months, he used to convey his messages on slate and pen. Then he dropped that too, and he used the alphabet board. He dropped the alphabet board also, and then he used only the sign language, which was rather difficult for us to understand.
One day, Meher Baba asked his lovers who were around him as to why people shout at one another when they are angry. Meher Baba explained that when a person is angry with another, that person is far removed from the heart. A distance is created, and that's why with the distance the pitch is raised and the shouting takes place. The farther the person is away from the heart, the louder the shouting. The other side of the picture is, he said, when two people are in love with each other, what happens? They don't shout at one another. They speak softly. The more the love, the softer the speech. Still softer the speech when they are closer together in love. When there is no need to have any speech, they begin to whisper. When they are too close in love, even whisper is dispensed with, and they gaze at each other. How much more, Baba says, I am closer to you all. I am closer to you all than your very breath. So what need have I for speech? He was the truth, he is the truth, he will ever remain the truth. As he said, he is the ancient one.
MeherBaba has come from India with a message to the West. He does not convey this message by speaking, but by his mere presence. When he wishes to communicate with people, he uses this board and points to the letters on it. My object in coming to the West is not with the intention of establishing new creeds or spiritual societies and organizations. I see the structure of all the great religions of the world tottering. The West is more inclined towards the material side of things. I intend to bring together all religions and cults like beads on one string and revitalize them for individual and collective needs. This is my mission to the West.
Well, some beautiful footage of Baba. And concerning the tremendous self-imposed discipline of total silence, an amusing incident occurred in Hollywood while Baba was visiting in 1932. There was a clever young reporter for the Los Angeles Times who suddenly sprang up and asked a question of Baba directly. Just how do you pronounce your name? And Baba's eyes twinkled as he looked at this reporter. And he motioned to one of the disciples, Erich, and he said, will you come over and tell this young man how you pronounce my name? And of course, Erich did. And this, of course, got the reporter, and he flushed up in the face a little bit, and later on, a few minutes later, he apologetically came over and said, I'm sorry, I was just trying to maybe dupe Meher Baba into talking, and maybe per se expose him as a fraud, and maybe he adopted the silence just as a novel publicity stunt. And so the next day, May 30th, 1932, the interview that was conducted with Meher Baba and his entourage appeared in the LA Times paper. And there was none of the flippancy or anything else that characterized this incident. And it was written both with dignity and restraint. So those were some of the things Baba had to go through when you're meeting the public and being silent. And Caroline, do you have something to add?
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, every year, I used to live in Myrtle Beach, which is where the Myrtle Beach Spiritual Center is, Baba's home in the West. And every year on Silence Day Eve, Kitty Davy, who basically ran the Spiritual Center for many, many years, she died a couple years ago at the age of 100. Every year she would give a little talk and introduce Silence Day, basically, and then we would keep silence for a little while. But I have a report here, actually, some thoughts that Kitty Davy gave July 9th, 1986 at the Spiritual Center. And these are just some of her observations and some of the things that Baba said. She said, God's word was, who am I? God's first word is, who am I? God's last word is, I am God. And the word that I, the God-man, will utter soon will be the sound of my infinite silence. Yes, the sound of my infinite silence, how difficult to grasp. And Baba goes on to say about silence. External silence helps the inner silence, and only in internal inner silence is Baba found, in profound inner silence. I am never silent, I speak eternally. The voice that is heard deep within the soul is my voice. And then she says, and the word that I, the God-man, will utter soon will be the sound of my infinite silence. The sound of my infinite silence. What is that sound? Baba states, I am never silent, I speak eternally. He also tells us, when I speak, it will be only one divine word, but it will be the word of words. This word of words will be the sound of his infinite silence. It is the sound of his infinite silence that stands out in my thoughts this evening. What meaning in connection with our own path of God can we find in these words? And then Kitty made an interesting observation here. She said, I have often thought about great artists such as Mozart and Beethoven and how they had access, as it were, to sounds unheard by their contemporaries. What equipment did they have that allowed them to hear such words? Well, they were conversant with all the musical talent at that time accessible, coupled with tremendous desire, intuition, and a closeness to God. Indeed, they were equipped with a greater degree of the silence within, and to reproduce what they heard, in the form of the great art. So I thought that was interesting what she was saying about the musicians and how they had been able somehow to tap into that.
Great. How do you spend your silence day? Are you silent? Sometimes you have to work and you can't.
Silence day is interesting. Sometimes I have had to work. I remember one silence day I was working and I was in sales, telephone sales, and I was trying to keep silence that day. So it somehow ended up that I ended up doing a lot of paperwork and never did have to use the phone that day, and I ended up leaving because I had to do some things out of the office, so it worked out really well. A couple of times I have fasted instead of keeping silence, because I think that in some instances fasting works just as well. 2 years ago, I kept silence and went with several friends on a road trip to visit Agnes at Marymount, who met Baba, and Marymount is near Ojai, and we stopped in a restaurant. We had a really funny experience because we were giving notes to the waitress and ordering what we wanted, and she came back and passed us notes back. So it was interesting because we ended up passing each other notes, and I thought it was funny how she ended up keeping silence too.
It's amazing how I think sometimes when you're silent, you absorb and bring in more things, especially if you were reading or say, I went once to a lecture class. Of course, I couldn't interchange with anybody, and I just maintained the silence, and it seemed like I was absorbing so much more in being silent. And also the fact is, a couple times at my job, of course, I have to use the telephone, which was funny. The people around me that were in my physical presence, I couldn't talk to. But when the phone rang, I would pick the receiver up and talk. So this discipline, of course, is an optional discipline that Baba lovers choose to do on July 10th, any day, any year, July 10th. And it's Silence Day, recognized by Baba lovers throughout the world. And this program is being aired today, July 10th. And unfortunately, we didn't cue you in as to being silent today, but maybe in the future you will be. And it's been a very exciting, enlightening time for us to share Baba's silence with you, and there's much more to share about it. There's many more people and interviews and film footage of it, and we hope to bring that to you in the future. Until next time, remember, don't worry, be happy.